just to recap, so Massimo, we had a conversation back in November, it's now May in 2017, and at that point we were just exchanging ideas and parallels and differences, and I was very interested in your area of theory and the way that you work with mathematics and some of your processes that you use, and especially the Blackboard. So we frame this conversation against the Blackboard, and I did have an idea actually about maybe us having a conversation, and I would read this like I would an artwork. So within art education we have critiques, where we sit and we look at something a student has done in all sorts of different media, and they're not allowed to talk. So we just read it, we say what we're understanding from it, and in this way the student can think about what they meant by it and how big a gap there is between their intentions and how other people are reading it. And of course lots of different people will read it in different ways, but it's a very interesting kind of process. So I did have this sort of vague idea that maybe I look at your Blackboard and I start looking at it and how I would read those marks and those symbols. But
and also in doing this you have to take into account that this is not written by one single person. It's not just written by me.
Right.
There's other guys that come here and say, this has been done by Marcello Messina, who came here last day and say, I have this idea that maybe one can look at this effect here, and then he made this plot, and then the
okay. So this has nothing to do with this.
No, right. And then it's just that he found an empty space, and then he filled it with what he had in mind. And also all other things are. This was done for a student as an example. It's describing the decay of a particle, the pion, in the electron and the corresponding neutrino, and this instead has been done in part by me, in part by Stefano Carignano, who's a postdoc of mine, and that instead was done by me, I think, yes. And that's related to another. It is weird, but it is related with this figure here, because there was a paper by I was discussing with Luca, which is another researcher, Luca Repoli. We were discussing about this idea of Frank Wilczek, who's a Nobel Prize, was proposing these time crystals, and then we are trying to understand what's the meaning of this time crystal.
Right. So this was a conversation you were having.
That's the corner in which we were discussing this. And then we are lazy, so usually we don't erase unless we are forced to do that. Then we find empty space for.
And so Luca is a theorist as well.
He's a theorist. He's from the University of L'Aquila. Yes, and is a collaborator of mine. Yes, and so. We use the Blackboard usually in this way. Other times we use it in a different way. Like if you want to make write a demonstration or something like that, then you have to write things. But the daily, usage is this one. Find an empty spot or erase it. Ask first. Yeah. Can I erase this?
Because that was my Nobel Prize.
Maybe you're erasing something that you cannot, and then of course it can be a problem. But in general, you feel and then there's the corner where it's my little agenda of important things to the deadlines that have to match for.
So it's a tool. It's a tool that helps you communicate and make something present, to think about something. So you work from your notes first and then transcribe onto the Blackboard?
Usually it's, I don't know. Usually, when I'm alone, working alone, I usually write notes. Unless I want to, I don't know, stress one particular thing to myself, then I use the Blackboard. It's very useful when you are discussing with other guys, or if someone was just to sketch an idea, as Marcello did an example. No, this although his interest was not in this part, but this bump there, and trying to convince me that there's a bump like that in a spectrum of path or whatever. And then that's the usual, or the other way in which is we use is when you want to, well, many different ways. Like if you want to spot mistakes somehow when you're in a demonstration, then you write on the blackboard. I'm pretty sure that I will find a minus sign or one half.
You will see that yourself, or somebody
myself
else?
As well. Sometimes when I'm frustrated, and I resort to the blackboard for finding a minus sign or something like that. And well, so it's the usage is very. That's one of the reasons I told you that one of the first things I did when I became coordinator of the group is to tell everybody to. Maybe they don't use it, but they have. In the long run, I think that we will understand that it's very useful for our job. I think it's extremely useful. Yeah,
but it's also part of the history of physics, isn't it?
No. Well, I think as a theorist, we use of course the computer. We do simulations. We do, but in the end, the pen and the sheet of paper and the blackboard are fundamental. Without them, also making a printout of a paper which is on the archive on the web. It's very important because then you can take your notes and of course you can also take notes by Acrobat, not putting. But it's different. I think there's something. Maybe because I'm an old guy, but I think there's some important thing that starts when you have a sheet of paper in your hand. So the contact, not with the object. And then I've read somewhere that you also make a mental map of a book or a review, and then when you look for something, you can see where it is. Literally, you can see, this is roughly not the place where I should look for something without going to the index. And then building a map. And this is, when you have a map, it's easy to, it's much easier. And also this is kind of a map, no? Of what you've done and what. Otherwise, if you don't have a map, you start going around without reaching an object. I don't know. This is at least the way in which I work. Maybe other theorists work in a completely different way.
No, I think that's really interesting because it's this idea of the haptic, of something that you touch, and that actually it does incite your brain in a different way. But also, I think, as I said before, it's this idea of keeping something present to yourself. So Marcello, was it who made this? So if Marcello had done that on a piece of paper and it had got covered up by lots of other, because that's there, you might be daydreaming, and you look at this and you think and then you take it a step further, or you understand, that's why it doesn't work, or
right. So you keep thinking about it somehow. Even in the back of your mind, no? Then you look
but if it was on your phone or in the computer or on an archive thing,
I'm completely against this smartphone. I have an old-fashioned phone because I think I have my ideas about smartphone, but I only use that one. And indeed, some of my colleagues really think that I'm vintage, to say the least. But I don't know. This is the way I am. Since I like to. This way of working and living. So that's I keep going.
and you were saying that you're very much analog. That you have an archive of notes.
The thing is, so there's plenty of things on the web and on these archives, but And also there's a lot of power in one of these machines, no? Since we have very important tools. You're impressive. There's a little computer over there can do amazing things. But as a theorist, so one of the aspects, at least, is this one, that you are not really satisfied, but about what a computer can do. You always try to find an analytical solution to a problem. No, the beauty of mathematics is that you can use approximation, and most of the times approximation give you a better description of reality than a computer simulation. Because a computer is somehow a black box. No, you really don't. Sometimes you don't understand what's going on. Instead, if you can write on a blackboard on a sheet of paper, the result of something, then you can convince yourself that it is okay, that it works. And it's something
because you've exposed the process.
Because what?
Because you've exposed how you've got from
A
to B.
And also because you have under control all the part of the you're going from one point to the other using a certain number of approximations, of course, because there are very few problems that can be exactly solved. Most of the time you have to resolve to computer, and but if you can find an approximate solution of something, first, you're proud of yourself. It's not typically it's a long. It's a long way. You have to walk a lot before reaching something. And then second, because then if you run a computer simulation, then you can understand better what's going on. No, because you can check some particular cases and see whether you produce or not your analytical results. And then the other thing is that sometimes even if they're very powerful, they make mistakes themselves because someone has written an algorithm for solving a problem. Maybe the algorithm has a bug somewhere. Yeah, it frequently happens. We're doing research, and then you have much more control of what you're doing. In some sense, we are trying always to minimize the number of mistakes that we are doing. Yeah. And then doing it on a sheet of paper and or on the Blackboard, it's much more convincing as that this is correct. But that really depends on the problem that you are trying to solve. There are some problems which you can never try to solve, even try to solve analytically. So you have to resort on computer simulation.
Right.
But
so one of the things I've been thinking about since our conversation was this idea of a kind of a construction of a space. So you spoke about creating scenarios or worlds or that don't exist, evolving things in mathematics that don't exist in the world. So there's this creation of space, and this really interests me from my perspective because the way I work with photography, I'm really intrigued by this idea of a kind of impossible space. So really, in a lot of ways, when I'm working, it's not a question of what I'm looking at, but how I'm looking at it, and what I'm trying to think about is constructing a space that is in some way kind of impossible. So it's not a documentary image of a space that when you look at it you could sort of mentally kind of re-inhabit that space and think, oh right, that's that time. But sometimes the way the camera looks at something, it constructs a space within the image that is kind of impossible in a way. It's not something you can get back into, and so, sometimes that's because for instance, when I was working with pinhole photography with very, very long exposures, you're actually you're introducing time to the image. So you're kind of opening up this space, but then you're just looking at this still image. So there's a space in it because the exposures are so long. And so when you were talking about the way that you were using mathematics and the way sometimes you're creating these things that don't actually exist in the world, or you were talking about that you can write within an equation more dimensions. So you're able to put something in an equation that actually suggests something really complex. And sometimes beyond your sort of cognition you were talking about as well, or maybe I'm conflating different ideas.
No, the one of the thing is that which is somehow similar to what you said, is that about your work, is that we really somehow we try to find a description of the reality, and of course the nature, the way we can describe nature is mathematics. So that's the language, for one has to use for describing it. But one of the points is that it's not that. At least this is my personal opinion. It's not shared by everybody. But it's my personal opinion that it's just our tool. We can. It's an incredible tool because it allows you to make predictions. That's but it's not the reality. The reality is what we have around. It's our description of reality, which is by means of mathematics. And I like a lot the fact that your non-documentary thing, because that's also key to my view, is that it's not really. It likes it's the how to say the mathematics speaks by itself somehow. It's not that it's if you look at to an equation, as an example, you derive by theory an equation, and then you start to explore this equation, and you can find something, because and then you match with this with the reality and try to figure out whether what is the implications of this equation are reflected in the real world. So it's not that you are really describing the world. You are somehow exploring by this incredible tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool which allows you to there are famous examples like Hilbert Einstein equation, or Dirac equation, or etc. That people are still and we are still somehow using for exploration, for figuring out what is. It's not that we are really catching a movie, and saying, okay, this is going to this one. It's just a tool for exploration and for understanding, deep understanding, in my opinion, because then you really see whether, and also in that case you can see whether your description by this equation or this system of equations corresponds to reality, and then whether sometimes it doesn't match. Sometimes you find something that, for example, with extra dimensions, sometimes you find that a particular model that you've built, because these are all models for describing nature, your model doesn't match with nature, or it matches only up to a scale. There are models which work very well for cosmology as an example, but you can never think of using it for describing the microscopic physics of atoms. So then you understand that this other important aspect of nature, which is what we call the effective field theories. So there's a description of matter which is not universal, but can only be applied in a certain domain, and that's and then, but with that system of equation, you can explore that domain, that area. Maybe the tool doesn't completely work in a different domain, and then it's like saying that you cannot take a picture with I don't know, some kind of objective of your camera if the object is too close or too far away, or you need a different. That's exactly the same idea. Or if there's a light, there's too much light, or because also there's energy scale in this. So if you want to describe very energetic phenomena or low energy phenomena, you have to use even if maybe the fundamental theory is one, which we cannot exclude, but our description now is using effective field theory. It is very effective. It allows you to do predictions, which is the most important thing, and understanding, of course.
Yeah.
So it's I liked a lot. As I told you, I read a bit of your about your work. This at least what I found on the web, and I like that there's non-documentary filming.
Well, it's hard for a lot of people to get their head around because if we've just been underground in the laboratory this morning, and there's that expectation that actually you're somehow documenting what this is, but really I'm trying to find a way of looking at that and trying to talk about the kind of haptic and the material quality of that, as well as the kind of content of what the different experiments are trying to kind of explore, which is extraordinary, and how that gets articulated through the environment itself, and how I look at that environment then speaks about that. So for instance, this morning we were in the large volume detector, which really interests me because it's one of the only experiments that I've come across that you're actually walking through it.
Yeah.
And it's like an architecture. It's like a kind of cityscape. It's like New York, it's in these kind of blocks, and you're sort of walking between, but also the photo multipliers are on the surface, not kind of hidden inside. So it isn't just like you're looking at the outside of this huge object. Then intellectually these layers that are in going to the kind of core of the detector. So there's something about the kind of the visibility of it, and the idea that you can actually walk through it, because I think part of the problem, or one of the kind of subtexts of this research project is trying to think through why we find it so difficult to connect to these areas of fundamental science. Where we can connect to biomedical science because of our intrinsic interest, because it's this is us. Even if genetics is really complex, we still have an interest in it because it's about our families and about our histories. But with fundamental science, it's so removed from us. The macro scale, the micro scale. And so our body, that we used to use to measure the world, in sort of Greek and Roman times, the body was the measure. That's what created urban architecture and architecture itself. And so it's how through my language, I start to think about these spaces. And so we've been filming, going into the tunnel with the GoPro and the car, which is extraordinary, going into this space. But I think that then I find this incredibly interesting, these kind of spaces of theory, in the way that you have spoken about, and that the methodology, but also the idea that knowledge is constructed through practice. This is your practice.
Yes. Yeah, that's fundamental. It's one of the things that you try to teach to students, that you only, which is also the reason why they have to do their exercises, because that's one of the things. Not only the exercises, that's an important part, doing whether you understood, the applications of the job, but also the other thing is trying the streams, you have an equation somehow, and then you have what happens if in this problem the mass goes to infinity. It's an extremely heavy object, and then you should, if the equation gives you something wrong, then which is not doesn't match your intuition, there are two possibilities. The first is that your result is wrong, or that your intuition doesn't work. And but in both cases you have understood, learned something, And that's the other. Indeed, whenever I deal with students, and then they say, "Okay, do this. So look at this equation. What happens if the G is a constant? Whether that constant is not a constant, that goes to zero. Then that decay rate goes to zero. That means that this guy here, the pion, this is the inverse of time of decay, becomes stable. It is not stable in our world, but that's just a number for us. So that can become a stable particle. Or if m mu, so on. You know, I say, look at this equation and try to look to understand what. But when you try to communicate this to other people, not trying to explain this kind of things, then it becomes sometimes hard because some people simply don't have lack of imagination. Other people, when you start to thinking about large scales or starts to feel this scare, of what is not only a mass but also distances and whatever, or the opposite side. What if you go to too much, to very small stuff, then you, because your intuition doesn't help you anymore. You are, and that's the reason why at that point we only trust mathematics, because that the only tool that we really have for dealing with the scales that we don't understand, we cannot really imagine, or extra dimensions, or behavior of particles, and so on. And then somehow you build your map, in your mind, saying that okay, that phenomenon can be explained by this, and then simply you have to replace Fermi, which is 10 to the minus 15 meters, with the parsec, which has
and then you have a kind of coordinate.
And you have a coordinate, right? Yeah. And then you start. Then you can start. This is an effective theory.
And then you get another one.
Right.
Yeah.
And you build a map, of the somehow the scales of the world, say, and then you from that point you can start to explore around. And if you don't do this, you simply are, in my opinion, you are lost. I mean, this, at least myself, because and somehow the idea of having a unification of theories is not really that one theory which can describe everything. Well, that's one way of saying it. The other way is that you have a theory which somehow transforms from one scale to the other in a continuum. So it gives you at each step, at each scale, line scale, a different effective theory for describing what's going on. And there's one beautiful example, which is a theory which is called quantum chromodynamics. And in this theory, the interaction strength changes with energy, or you can say in a different way, changes with the scale. So it's always the same theory. So it gives you a map for a lot of phenomena, but with the interaction strength, it changes. So your theory actually is evolving with the scale. Yeah. And that's a bit the fundamental of renormalization theory, is the technical name. So it gives you a continuum.
It sounds like reciprocity in photography.
Yeah.
So, you were talking about this idea of intuition, which I think is very interesting, because I haven't heard that mentioned as an idea within physics. But also this notion that when you get beyond particular scales, that really tests your imagination, and you can kind of lose your coordinates. And it's what Kant spoke about as this vertigo that you get when you get to these kind of extremes, which I think is it's a very good way to describe that sort of feeling of not being able to find your kind of coordinates. So I mean, do you think to that extent that that idea of intuition is innate, and so if you haven't got that, you will never be able to evolve it as a physicist or a mathematician?
Yeah, without intuition, there would be, I think, even before mathematics, comes the intuition or something, and then. But after intuition, I mean, it's like I don't know, writing a song and the lyrics. There's the music and the lyrics. I mean, both things I think first comes one, then comes the other, and then intuition is driven by. We find some rules. I would say you're not free in. No, there are some rules you have to respect, which are most of the time given by the symmetries of our world. And that's the way in which you try not to, because you can imagine the most weird thing that maybe is even realized in some way in the world. No, most of the things built by mathematicians, some of them have been really useful in understanding some physical objects. But the point is that when you want to describe something and you want to use your intuition, then you find that symmetries help you a lot. And then, as an example, when usually theory starts from an object which is called the Lagrangian, which is after the name of Lagrange, a very big mathematician. And then, but you're not all the freedom of the world of writing this object, because our world has some symmetry. So if you turn around yourself, you find the same position, no? And this is described by symmetry group, a continuous symmetry group as an example. You can rotate yourself in a continuous way around your axis, and then the object that you are writing, the Lagrangian, must have this symmetry. If somehow it is not symmetric under this rotation, as an example, it seems that it's not describing your object. So your intuition is fundamental, because otherwise, if you only have symmetries, then it's not something that gives you, to the next step of exploration. But your intuition must work in this way. And the other thing is that once you have written something, then your intuition also tells you maybe I should explore this part. It's somehow more interesting, this regime, of. And I think it's for a theorist is fundamental. Otherwise, everything would be dull. It was something not really interesting.
Again, there's all sorts of things kind of firing off in my head, but partly thinking about the difference between an art object and a design object, and a designer will want to get to a certain point, and they'll want to get there in the most kind of elegant way, and then make a prototype and then produce that thing in the most cost-effective way. But there's this sense that you start here, and this is where you want to get to. When you're making artworks, you may think that you want to get over here, but you'll do this, and then actually maybe here is when you get there, you realise that's where the work is.
Yeah.
And this.
Well, that's perfect.
This was a kind of mirage.
Yeah, which also another interesting thing that frequently happens. That sometimes you start studying something, and then you, in your way, you understand that actually that's not really. There's something more interesting that you can do, taking another direction, and exploring another part of the map somehow, and that's why is more interesting, because you think, your intuition tells you that this is, but somehow this is another thing which is probably important in art as well. You have to educate yourself somehow to do this, no? Yeah. Because unfortunately, I think that most of the people, the education at school, tells you, okay, there is a problem, solve the problem, get to the problem. And the interesting part is not solving the problem. Well, that's part of the job. I think it's exploring around, the problem. As I was telling you before, imagine that it's not 1 apple or 2 apples, 2 plus 2, but it's 100 plus 100 apples, that you have to, or suppose then you're exploring a different part of the problem, and then you maybe find really something interesting and unusual. And that's the way in which most of the time we work. I mean, we start thinking with Luca in particular, this is because it comes from a different field of theoretical physics. It comes from so-called condensed matter, which is study of material. He said I come from particle physics. And somehow we are trying to do together a job, but we are not really still able to focus on one particular problem. Because when you start to focus on one problem, then another one, no?
Springs up. Yeah.
Oh, maybe you should do that. And then we are still going around to see what. Sometimes we find a wall.
Yeah.
And you cannot get around because there's a fundamental problem.
Yeah.
And then you have to find a way to get around these walls because this tells you that you cannot realize this thing for some important reason, and then you should take a different direction. But it's really nice when you start doing this because now we are trying with him to realize it is still. I mean, it's already been done by other groups. Realize neutrino-like particles in condensed matter physics, and then there's always a lot of discussion, even in the evening or in the night. When there's maybe Luca, maybe we should try to.
It's bringing you now. Yeah.
Maybe yes. Yeah. No, but he sent me an email saying maybe I found a way out of. Indeed, I mean, afterward I will give him a talk, and then other times. Also happened, there's a very nice story about my advisor. We were having a pizza with his wife, and then he started like this, and his wife said, "Oh, you're still thinking about funnels," because we were trying a way of describing funnels as fundamental particles. It was a job in the, and then of course your mind goes. So there is a. In some sense, it takes his way, and explores, and then sometimes gives you a warning. Oh, look, maybe this is this is interesting thing, and so it's indeed. I mean, when I try to describe my job, it's really hard because it takes a lot of time because. Sometimes you are you're simply doing standard things like I'm editing material, which is but most of the times it was like that when I was a postdoc, now a bit less. But you are doing this kind of discussion, these things. So when my father was asking me. Used to ask me. Now he doesn't ask me anymore this kind of question because what's your job? And they say, well, we try to solve problems, which is somehow correct. But the problems we sometimes created by ourselves. So, and then communication is. But I think in art is something similar.
I think. What you're describing has a kind of freedom and a latitude in it that I really didn't realise existed in science because I think often there's this kind of false dichotomy that between kind of science and the arts, and that you would not have that freedom. You would be starting from a premise and you're going to get to that. You're going to get from A to B, and you're going to set out your hypothesis, and then you're going to. But in theory, it seems like it's an entirely different kind of territory. Because you said, I'm going to find the thing that you said last time.
What did I say?
You said I have to come up with a nice idea for exploring things or solving a problem, and the route's my own. And that just felt, it just overlaps exactly with art, which is curiosity-driven research. And I think increasingly that there are kind of fields of art that are overlapping with other expert cultures and thinking about how these things kind of function together, but also trying to develop confidence in art as research that actually in these interactions with other expert cultures that actually some new knowledge can occur.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about me coming here and interpreting what Gran Sasso does to a lay public, although I am interested, you know, in those ideas of what allows people to connect or not. But, you know, if I've done my job, then something new comes from it. Something new comes from the work, but how people then interact with that or perceive that, but also in the interactions that I have with people. Hopefully, that's the idea, and it's what's happened. But just sort of listening to that conversation again, that really kind of struck me.
Yeah, well, I think there are different ways of doing research, of course, no? Because if you have to overcome a problem, no, then there is the art way of doing it, no, like use the theory and then you doing calculation. But this is actually something which has to be done sometimes. Brute force, no? Squeezing the equation in such a way that you solve a particular problem, because there's a lot of interest in that kind of problems, because sometimes hard problems pop up, no? And then you have to be ready and prepared for dealing with it, meaning that you have to have a good knowledge of mathematics, and then you have to be but there are most of the interesting things are not obtained by a hard job, just by this walking and intuition and exploring and doing calculation, discussing with other people. That's fun. And also because sometimes someone has, which seems funny, but has already done the hard job, but in a different field. So, I mean, you come across a problem, no, which is hard, like I don't know. You have to study periodic array. Usually means everything which is periodic and has a structure is hard to deal with in mathematics. But this problem maybe has been solved in another community in an elegant way, and then you take. I mean, in our field, unfortunately, there's no copyright. I mean, if you do solve a problem, then you can get. I mean, catch. You use the idea in your field.
Yeah.
There's complete freedom in. Of course, you have to quote this site, this the result obtained by these other guys. Most of, other times, I mean, like the famous Higgs mechanism. No, it's not it's called the Higgs mechanism, but it's Anderson Higgs, because it was the first idea came. Maybe we already discussed it. It came in condensed matter physics, in the description of superconductors. Because it's exactly the same mathematics, which is the means in which you give mass to particles, which is this Higgs mechanism, was used in condensed matter physics to describe superconductivity. And it's I mean, you can translate exactly the length from one to the other. And so Higgs, I don't know in the Higgs. I mean, he only used the idea. You have to recognize this first. But what helps you? That doesn't have mathematics. You have to have the intuition that that problem is related to my problem, and then I take the physics which has been developed there and apply it to my case, and then I have to change it because of course maybe the symmetries are not the same and so on and so forth. But then you apply that idea, that intuition, that field to your field, and that's the most fruitful way of working, in my opinion. But on the other hand, sometimes you find a problem that is maybe it's not been there before. Then you have to solve it, right, and try to find a solution. But I think these aspects are similar to art. My opinion. There is something which is maybe the aspect. I don't know whether we really want to communicate something. Maybe with art you want to communicate something to other people. We are not much interested. I mean, at least at the beginning, we are just interested in exploration. No, and then at some point you're asked to communicate this, no, to communicate it as, and that's a completely. persons which are paid, I mean, their job is to communicate these results to, because I can certainly do that, but there are people that can do much better than me, these kind of things. But in art, I think you want to communicate also something. It's just an exploration.
But I think there's a sort of distinction between communicating the results of that and communicating the methodology that touches. I mean, it feels very philosophical to me. These ideas about how you might do something, and those kind of roles of imagination and intuition, and thinking about these kind of spaces and actual spaces and impossible spaces. So it's, you know, I don't understand the content of your work at all, but I'm really interested in the kind of methodology and the way that you're talking about your relationship to your field.
No, the other thing I was thinking, sorry, that it was about the role of drawing, which is for us is very important. Because I mean, this is called the Feynman diagram, which describes the cable part. But the important thing is that it allows you to use a lot of intuition. Drawing is all the other things like those one, or that's a plottable potential, no? It's not really that you want.
This one.
Yeah, that's the one. Yes, the potential is somehow okay. It's a potential describing a field, so on. But if you can draw it, no, it's much. If you can communicate with the picture, can sketch like this on the blackboard or on a piece of paper, then it's much easier to convince other. I also convince yourself that it's and that maybe there's something similar. Not you want to communicate something. Then the most effective way is making a picture, much more than equation, I would say.
And do you get a kind of aesthetic pleasure out of it? do you ever say that's a really good blackboard? I really like my blackboard at the moment.
Yes, but the biggest pleasure at all is when you look for something, no, that your intuition tells that it should be there, and you find it. I mean, there's a certain point you say, oh, it should definitely be like that. It should be, but the mathematics doesn't allow you to get there. Maybe a drawing suggests that you should get it, and then you, yes, and at the end of the day, or a week, or a month, or depends on the, you get to the, then really, I mean, satisfaction is, it's the driving force really for you know, drawing. I'm not really much happy with my drawings. I mean, sometimes you find there've been a couple of cases in my experience in which by a drawing we have understood something. Yes, that happened. And that's also, but that's related with the satisfaction for having understood something. Not the aesthetic beauty of.
No, I understand that. So when it all comes together, you're happy. You get your skis out the shower, and off you go.
No, but indeed, I noticed one thing about myself, and I'm not sure that this is what everybody else. Then when you reach a result, no, I'm so satisfied that. To go around, have a walk, and then thinking again about that, or going skiing, running, or whatever, just to enjoy the moment. Because I mean, this, because you are satisfied with what you have done. Then after a bit comes the second part that I'm satisfied, but I want to go beyond that. And unfortunately, most of the time it takes. Then when you reach a result, you have to write something, because unfortunately, it means sometimes it's very boring. Sometimes writing, you find. You clarify your ideas also. the part of communication, with other scientists at least, on specialized reviews, journals, and but at least for me, the most nice part, the satisfaction comes from the understanding of all the discoveries. Let me use this word, maybe it's not really appropriate, but discovery of something. That's and then there's also a kind of back reaction sometimes that you never think about all the time you have spent for reaching that result, but you think of other ways of reaching the same result by shorter path, because maybe you got there by to go from here to there, you got around the Sasso, on the mountain, and then you found that actually the point was not that far away. It's only that you took your exploration, no?
Yeah. But you were also talking about this idea of editing, and that it's not a very efficient way. If you were kind of looking at it from the outside, because you're writing and rewriting, but through that distillation process, you're actually reaching the kind of core of something. And
yes, well, that depends. That sometimes happens, but most of the time you try to find the most effective way of communicating this, also when you write something, because maybe the way in which you have understood the thing is not really maybe it's the more intuitive one, but maybe it's not the formally correct one, no? So if you want that your referee, accepts your paper, sometimes you have to go through the formal path, because the intuitive path is not enough. And then, so it depends. Okay, communication is in the sense of some limitations, rules, I would say. If you want to convince someone, maybe if you want to convince a colleague that his result is correct, is enough the intuitive path. I don't have to go through all the formal steps. But for my paper to being accepted on a journal, most of the time I must give proof of what of my result. So, but there are also some some journals in which this is not strictly requested, in which sometimes they accept your paper even if you don't have a formal proof of, because it's you have enough convincing arguments that it's the correct result.
And do you present papers as well?
Yes, conferences and sure, seminars as well. And this is a different job. Because you have most of the time limited time, and then in that case, I do my best for presenting things with the pictures, with drawings, and because or plots. Because if you put an equation on a slide, then you have to spend a lot of time for a description of the equation, and usually, when you look, if you're not an expert in the field, and then you see an equation in a presentation, then you do not feel at home, that you don't feel like you're really understanding it. But I think, with time I've been improving my presentation. At least I now pay much more attention to what is my audience. Usually I don't give general talks on. I think I have an audience. I change my talk depending on the person I'm in front. And of course. You can change a lot if these are kids of elementary school or scientists, but also in the scientific community, you have to think, okay, this is a seminar, it's 1 hour seminar in a university, so there are people from, particle physics, from cosmology, maybe they can be interested. And then,
could you imagine presenting to artists?
Oh, why not?